A powerful businesswoman gave one quiet order. And within seconds, security was dragging a tired single father toward the exit. No one questioned it. No one stepped in. Then something happened that froze the entire building. The CEO's highly trained K9, a dog known for flawless discipline, broke formation. Instead of obeying its handler, the dog rushed past the guards, threw itself at the frightened father, and began whimpering at his feet. The room fell silent. How could a professional protection dog recognize a man everyone else treated like a stranger? What hidden bond could be strong enough to override years of elite training? Many people watching the scene believed it was just an emotional moment. The truth was far more extraordinary. Stay with me, because once the real story begins, every decision, every secret, and every heartbreaking sacrifice will finally make sense. The lobby of Hartwell Technologies was unusually quiet that rainy Tuesday morning. Employees carrying coffee cups slowed their steps as they noticed a man standing near the reception desk. His jacket was clean but worn. His shoes carried the marks of someone who spent more time walking than driving. Beside him stood a little girl, no older than 8, holding his hand with quiet trust. She clutched a small backpack against her chest as if it held everything that mattered. The father wasn't asking for money. He wasn't causing trouble. He simply asked the receptionist if he could deliver a sealed envelope directly to CEO Victoria Hartwell. "It concerns her late father," he said politely. The receptionist hesitated. The name of the late founder wasn't something strangers casually mentioned. She picked up the phone. Within minutes, 2 security guards appeared. Their expressions were firm. "Sir, you'll need to leave." The father didn't argue. "I understand," he replied softly. "Please. Just give her the envelope." One guard reached for it. Before he could take it, another voice echoed across the marble lobby. "No unauthorized visitors." Victoria herself had just stepped out of the executive elevator. Elegant, confident, accustomed to making decisions that changed companies overnight. She barely looked at the man before turning toward security. "Escort him outside." Gasps spread through the lobby. The little girl squeezed her father's hand tighter. "Dad," she whispered. He knelt beside her with a gentle smile. "It's all right, sweetheart." His calmness confused everyone watching. It was almost as though he expected this. The guards moved closer. One took hold of his arm. Another reached for the envelope. That's when a sharp bark shattered the silence. Everyone turned. Shadow, Victoria's prized German shepherd. A former military K9 whose obedience had become legendary. Employees often joked the dog followed commands better than most executives. Shadow stood perfectly still for one heartbeat. Then the impossible happened. The dog ignored its handler. Ignored Victoria. Ignored every command being shouted. Instead, Shadow sprinted straight toward the father. Security reacted instantly. "Grab the dog." But Shadow wasn't attacking. He slowed just before reaching the man. His ears folded back. His tail lowered. Then, with a heartbreaking cry that sounded almost human, the massive shepherd pressed his head against the father's knees. The little girl blinked in disbelief. The father closed his eyes. Very slowly, he whispered just one word. "Shadow." The dog's entire body trembled. Tears welled in the animal's eyes as he rolled onto his side, exposing his stomach, a gesture of complete trust that trained protection dogs almost never offered to strangers. An uncomfortable silence filled the lobby. Victoria frowned. "That's impossible." Her head of security stared at the dog's identification badge. "This dog has never behaved like this. Not once." Employees exchanged nervous glances. Someone quietly began recording with a phone. The father gently scratched behind Shadow's ear. Without looking up, he spoke so softly that only those nearby could hear. "You still remember?" The words landed like stones. "Remember what?" No one had an answer. Victoria stepped closer, studying the stranger's face for the first time. There was something oddly familiar. Not enough to place him. Just enough to leave a feeling she couldn't explain. Shadow refused every command to return. Instead, he positioned himself between the guards and the father, watching anyone who came too close. Not with aggression, with determination. It was as if he had made a choice. A choice no one believed a trained K9 would ever make. Then the receptionist finally opened the envelope that had nearly been taken away. She expected a complaint. Or legal documents. A single faded photograph slipped onto the polished floor. Victoria instinctively bent down to pick it up. The moment she saw the image, the color drained from her face. It showed a younger version of Shadow as a frightened puppy. Standing beside him was the very same single father. And next to them was Victoria's own father, smiling, with one handwritten sentence across the bottom. The day we found a hero no one will ever know about. The lobby that had been filled with whispers only moments earlier became completely silent. Because everyone suddenly realized one thing. The story they thought they understood had only been hiding the truth. Victoria stared at the photograph as though it had rewritten everything she believed about her own family. Her father rarely smiled in pictures. Yet here he was, laughing beside an ordinary-looking man and a young German Shepherd puppy that couldn't have been more than a few months old. She looked up slowly. "Who are you?" The father answered without anger. "My name is Daniel Carter." The name meant nothing to the executive standing nearby. But it struck Victoria like a faint memory she couldn't quite reach. Daniel carefully folded the photograph and spoke with remarkable calm. "Your father promised that if the day ever came when Shadow forgot me, then I'd know he had truly found a better life." He looked at the dog. "I guess he never forgot." Shadow rested his head against Daniel's boot, refusing to move even an inch. The head of security cleared his throat. "Ma'am, should we remove him?" Victoria didn't answer. For the first time in years, she wasn't certain what the right decision was. She simply asked one question. "How did you know my father?" Daniel smiled sadly. "Not through business. Through one terrible night." The entire lobby seemed to lean closer. Outside, rain tapped gently against the tall glass windows. Daniel's daughter looked up at him. "You've never told me this story. I wanted you to grow up before hearing it." Years earlier, Daniel had worked nights repairing electrical systems across the city. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid enough to keep food on the table. One freezing winter evening, he was driving home along a deserted country road when he spotted an SUV that had slid into a snow-filled ditch. Most cars drove past. The storm was getting worse. Stopping meant risking getting trapped yourself. Daniel stopped anyway. Inside the vehicle was an older man, unconscious behind the wheel. Beside him sat a terrified German Shepherd puppy, barking non-stop. Daniel didn't recognize the driver. He simply broke the window, pulled the man free, wrapped him in his own coat, and waited nearly an hour for emergency services. By the time the ambulance arrived, Daniel's hands were numb from the cold. The puppy refused to leave him. "He wouldn't stop shaking," Daniel recalled softly. "So I held him until help arrived." Victoria's eyes widened. She remembered that accident. Her father had called it the luckiest day of his life. But he had never revealed who rescued him. The room grew quiet again. One executive whispered, "Why would he keep that secret?" Daniel gave a tired smile. "Because I asked him to." He shrugged. "I didn't save him for recognition. I saved him because someone needed help." Several employees lowered their eyes. The simplicity of those words carried more weight than any speech. Then Daniel reached into his coat pocket. "I wasn't planning to bring this." He placed an old leather collar on the reception desk. Shadow's ears shot upright. The dog stood, walked forward carefully, and sniffed it. His entire body began trembling again. Attached to the collar was a tiny brass tag. The engraving had faded with time. Victoria leaned closer. It read, "Udo." On the back were 3 simple words. "Come home safe." Without hesitation, Shadow gently picked up the collar. He carried it back to Daniel. Then, with extraordinary care, he laid it across Daniel's lap before resting his head there once more. Several employees quietly wiped away tears. Even the guards who had dragged Daniel toward the door looked visibly uncomfortable. Victoria felt a lump rise in her throat. Why didn't my father ever tell me? Daniel looked toward the ceiling for a long moment. He wanted you to build your company without feeling indebted to anyone. He believed kindness loses its meaning the moment it's used to collect favors. Victoria could almost hear her father's voice in those words. Sounded exactly like him. For a brief moment, guilt settled over the room. She had judged a man without asking a single question. But before anyone could speak again, the silence was broken by an elderly maintenance worker who had been standing quietly near the elevators the entire time. His hands began to shake. He stepped forward, staring at Daniel in disbelief. I knew I'd seen that face before. Daniel turned. The old man's eyes filled with tears. You don't remember me. But 20 years ago, you saved my life too. A wave of stunned whispers spread across the lobby. One rescue could have been chance. Two felt impossible. Then the maintenance worker slowly rolled up his sleeve. Across his forearm was a long scar. The fire at the Riverside warehouse. You carried me out before the roof collapsed. Daniel's expression changed. He finally remembered. The old man smiled through tears. I've been trying to thank you for 2 decades. Before Daniel could answer, a black luxury sedan pulled up outside the building. Doors opened. A distinguished elderly lawyer stepped out carrying a sealed document case. The moment Victoria saw him, her heartbeat quickened. He had been her father's personal attorney. He had disappeared from public life shortly after the founder's funeral. The lawyer walked through the lobby without greeting anyone. He looked directly at Daniel, then at Shadow. Finally, he turned to Victoria and quietly said, Your father instructed me to deliver something only if these two ever found each other again. Every person in the lobby fell silent, because whatever rested inside that weathered case had been waiting for this exact moment. The elderly lawyer placed the weathered case on the reception desk with extraordinary care. For a moment no one spoke. Even the sound of the rain outside seemed to disappear. He unlocked the brass clasps and slowly removed a thick envelope sealed with dark blue wax. Across the front, in unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "To be opened only if Shadow chooses Daniel Carter over everyone else." Chill swept through the lobby. Victoria stared at the writing. It's my father's handwriting. The lawyer nodded. He believed one heart could never lie. He trusted this dog more than any document. With trembling hands, Victoria broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter. She recognized every curve of her father's pen. Her voice shook as she began reading aloud. If you are holding this letter, then Shadow has made a decision no amount of training could erase. That means Daniel Carter has finally returned. I owe my life to this man. The room remained perfectly still. Victoria swallowed hard. The next sentence struck her like lightning. But saving me was only the smallest thing he ever did. Confused whispers spread through the employees. Victoria continued reading. Several months after the accident, I learned Daniel's wife had passed away unexpectedly. He was left to raise his little daughter alone. I offered him money. He refused. I offered him a management position. He refused again. He said there were people more qualified. The lawyer quietly smiled. That was Daniel. Victoria looked toward him. Daniel lowered his eyes. He had never spoken of any of this. The letter continued. So I made him one promise. If he or his family ever truly needed help, my family would help them without question. Victoria slowly lowered the page. Tears gathered in her eyes. "I failed that promise," Daniel answered gently. "No. You simply didn't know it existed." The words carried no blame, only honesty. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then Shadow stood.